Careful where you go when sky turns to gold. Sneak into a hollow and hide in the shadows. You'll hear the scraping. There's no mistaking. Your ears'll be ringing when payday's a-comin'. Where I'm from, that was one of the nursery rhymes we sang as children. We'd chant it as a prelude to a slight variation on the game of tag. In our version, whoever was it was given a twig and could whack whoever got caught. You know, extra incentive to run. I grew up to be the fastest runner in my group of friends, but only because I had been the slowest so many times. I still have a scar from the time Peter Thomas decided to swap his twig out with a thick tree branch. Lesson learned: be faster. Leave it to children to turn a gory urban legend into a fun little schoolyard song and game. Well, fun if you don't get caught. The story behind the song is a lot like most urban legends, shrouded in absolute mystery. There's no dates, no names, no proof any of it is real. For the longest time, I thought it was all just bullshit. Just a game, just a song, just a little tale to spook other people. I was wrong. Legend has it there used to be a mine in the mountain out on the other side of town. The owner was a renowned cheapskate, investing virtually nothing into safety precautions and using any excuse in the book to withhold wages from the miners. Your hard hat broke? That's coming out of your pay. You were late making your delivery today. You're only getting half. That kind of stuff. One day, part of the mine collapsed, killing 16 out of the 17 workers. Around dusk, the only survivor hammered his way out, bloodied and bruised, and headed straight to the main office. It was payday, and he intended to give his boss a mouthful about not investing in support beams, and to collect everyone's wages to give to their families. The boss refused to pay, claiming it was their fault they died. If they wanted to be paid, they should have been more careful. The miner lost it. He white-knuckled the bloody hammer still in his hand, grabbed his boss by the collar, and dragged him into the streets where he hobbled him in front of a growing crowd of onlookers. The boss begged for his life, but the miner continued slamming the hammer into him, screaming about his wages. There was so much blood on the street. It was hard to tell where the twilight sky ended and where the street began. In the end, he beat his boss into a pulp and ground his skull into a fine powder. All that was left of him was a single gold tooth. They say the miner took it, mumbled, "Not enough," limped back to the mine, and disappeared. They say at dusk and dawn on payday, when the sky turns gold like the gold he seeks, he roams the streets looking for his dues, dragging his hammer behind him, and killing anyone dumb enough to be outside. He'll continue to do this until the debt is paid. There were just so many holes with that story, I never gave it any stock. I mean, the most important part, the whole haunting on payday thing, just doesn't make any sense to me. Payday isn't consistent from one employer to the other. So, like, when would he actually appear? I'm sure for every day of the week, there's at least one person who gets their paycheck. That's a huge commitment, you know. Who has time to haunt the streets every morning and night? No one. Not even otherworldly miners. That was my mistake, assuming payday meant our payday, when it really meant his payday. It was after school and I was staying at a friend's house for the night. He lived on the other side of town. I didn't really like going there because the buildings were old, smelled weird, and everyone had bars on their windows. I don't know about you guys, but when I see bars on windows, I think crime hot zone. I would have gone home, but I didn't have much of a choice. My parents wanted a night off, and we had a project to finish for class. We were at the kitchen table working on our project, and I vividly remember the tension mounting on everyone's faces as the sun began to set. David's mom locked the doors and closed the curtains. David's sister ran to the back door and did the same. Even David, who was usually the happy-go-lucky type, seemed to sink under the weight of anxiety. He said something about needing to use the restroom, but he headed up to the second floor instead of across the hall, where there had been a perfectly good toilet. I don't know what he was doing up there, but I heard the pitter-patter of his feet going from side to side, and never once did I hear a toilet flush. I wanted to ask him about it when he came back, but I got distracted by a strange sound coming from outside. The best way I can describe it is the sound of a dislodged truck bumper scraping along the cement. I jumped off the chair so I could look out the window, but felt David's mom's hand clutching my shoulder tightly. I could almost hear the word "don't" whispered with every exhale. The scraping sound continued. Closer, farther, closer, farther. David returned and immediately jumped back into the project. I could see him tensing every time the scraping got nearer, but he was doing his best to ignore it, going so far as to hum to himself. His mother turned me around and pointed to the table. I was more confused than scared, to be honest. Though in hindsight, I should have been the former. I went back to work on the project and did like the rest of the family. Pretended I just couldn't hear the sound. I never went back to his house after that. A few weeks ago, I moved to David's part of town. I'm an adult now, and frankly, I couldn't afford to live anywhere else. I never got over my discomfort about the old houses and the bars on the windows. But you gotta live within your means, you know? I thought at worst I was going to get robbed. Boy howdy, I wish that were the case now. I was coming home from work late last night, and the sun had begun to set. The sky turned into this breathtaking gold. Then, as though with the flick of a switch, there was something weird in the air, and the sudden absence of ambient sound. No children in the yard. No cars in the streets. Every door was closed. Every curtain drawn. I thought back to that night at David's and tried to laugh the nervousness away. Then I heard it. The slow scraping. The sound of metal on cement coming up behind me. I turned around and saw something I still remember to this day, because it happened yesterday, just down the street from me. It was a man, but it wasn't a man. I mean, yeah, definitely man-like, but it was all wrong. He was tall, bulky, covered in soot and blood, and dragging a large hammer behind him. Not a fancy hammer either, but this old rusted thing with a wooden handle. The only reason it dragged on the ground was the man's disproportionately long, meaty arms and hunched shoulders leading the hammer level with the street. He looked like an ape, all upper body, little in the ways of legs and hips. I couldn't help but remember that nursery rhyme. And that chilling last line. When payday's a-comin'. I swallowed my apprehension and took a slow step back. His head shot up at me. His face was caked in grime, eyes bloodshot, and black teeth bared like a rabid dog. He slid the hammer forward and raked it across the ground. The smartest thing I did was run. Run as fast as my legs could take me. As fast as I had trained myself to run. As fast as a goddamn gazelle trying to outrun a cheetah. My house was just a few blocks away. But in survival mode, that distance felt so much longer. The scraping was closing in on me fast. I stumbled on my front steps but managed to make it inside, slamming the door shut behind me. Panting breathlessly, I leaned against the door and pawed at the lock, barely managing to turn it before I heard the scraping at the bottom of my steps. I was home. I was safe, I told myself. Until I felt a knock on my back that sent me staggering forward. He was at the door. Oh my God, he was at my door. The hammer struck, splintering the wood. By that point, I was a mess of panic. When sky turns to gold, sneak into a hollow, and hide in the shadows. A kid's song. A stupid kid's song saved my life. I crawled, gasping, into the kitchen. I hid in the cupboard under the sink. It was a tight fit, but thankfully I hadn't put anything in there yet. I closed the door just in time to hear my front door shatter. I could hear his footsteps, and I tried my best not to breathe too loud. To not be heard. I heard crashing sounds as he smashed my things with his hammer. I didn't care about my meager belongings. I only cared about not being on the receiving end of one of those blows. Then, without warning or explanation, everything went quiet, except for the ringing in my ears. No more footsteps. No more smashing. I stayed hidden, convinced he was just standing outside of the cupboard door, mocking me. But after an hour went by without a single noise, I peeked out and saw an empty kitchen. He was gone. The sky was dark. My house was a wreck. Payday came, and I'm terrified he'll be coming again. In 2 more weeks.